Good morning. My name is Brian Scott. I'm with the Clean Energy Revolution, and welcome to the Clean Energy Revolution live virtual event. I am here with Nico Johnson and Amanda Rico to talk about jobs transitioning in the energy transition. I'm going to kick it over to Nico here to lead this discussion. But first, we'll kick it over to Amanda for self-introductions.
Sure. Yeah. Thanks, Brian. Yeah, it's great to be here with you two guys. I'm based in Houston, so I'm not sure what the time difference is for you guys, but it's an awesome day. Weather's getting great. Yeah. So just in terms of my background, I'm Dr. Amanda Rico, and I own Rico Editorial Services. I generally work with senior level to executive level clients in the oil, gas, and energy industries. And sometimes occasionally with executives who are in healthcare or other industries as well. I specialize in document creation, resumes, cover letters, and LinkedIn profiles. So yeah, and I'm a Houston Business Journal columnist and going to be working with a new magazine called Oil Woman as well as their career columnist. So thanks for having me.
Perfect.
Fantastic. And my name is Nico Johnson. I run a company called Suncast Media, and I've been in the solar and broader renewables industry since 2006. I got my start building small to medium-sized projects and worked all the way up to, at the time, the largest solar panel manufacturer in the world, Trina Solar. So almost 15 years of experience now, schlepping clean energy, and it has been my absolute joy and pleasure over the last 5 years to run a podcast called Suncast, where we interview folks in the clean energy industry to understand that how the transition is affecting folks at an organizational level and how some of the iconic companies in the clean energy sector are leading the charge in what we colloquially refer to as the energy transition. So it's my pleasure, Brian and Amanda, to join you all here as a pseudo moderator of a discussion that that touches on a real pain point, but a real opportunity in our industry and in the broader industry sector. Energy touches on every aspect of your life, whether you're consciously aware of it moment by moment. You are consuming products that are made from the result of what we call the Industrial Revolution, which in many ways was founded on the energy revolution, our ability to harness fire, our ability to generate electricity and distribute it all over the United States and other parts of the world. That fundamentally has been the bedrock of that industry, which has been the oil and gas industry, what we call fossil fuels or traditional energy, has been shaken in the last few years, and none more perhaps than the last year, at least not since the 70s and the oil embargoes, et cetera. Just since March, more than 120,000 jobs in the oil and gas industry have been lost, have been laid off. Those folks are on the sidelines. Amanda and Brian are well aware that in years past, it's not uncommon to see these layoffs. Exxon, Chevron, you name big oil companies laying off 5, 10, 15,000 people at a clip. And most of those folks just sort of hang back. They get a nice little severance to hang on to. They make it 2-3 months, maybe a year, and then they're welcomed back into the fold when the good times again return. I think the question in the meta narrative around the energy transition and fossil fuel industry that I would pose to you, Brian, is are these oil and gas folks ever going to have an entree back into what they call sort of the reality of how energy works and these old fossil fuel jobs? And if not, can oil and gas workers join us and make this transition to renewables? You're an oil guy who's transitioned to renewables. What's your perspective on that?
I think it's going to be different in every, obviously, market. I think speaking for myself, living in Calgary, Alberta, where we have one of the highest production costs for oil itself, a very high emissions effect as well, which can be a large impact with carbon taxes, stuff like that, as well as the difference between what we actually can sell it for and the WTI price, based on we don't have a large access to market here. It's not very profitable for most projects now. Most big capital projects that get planned in the last decade do not actually get approved. We saw that with the big tech mine that was planned. It was a massive project that got shelved well even before the well before COVID, well before the price drop. There's not a lot of optimism in Alberta right now that we will see any of these large capital projects, right? And from my experience working in oil and gas, even in energy, when we're building up capacity of a given product, it could be a renewable solar farm or it could be an oil plant. When we're building up capacity, we have a great increase in jobs, whether it be engineering, design, project management, all of that stuff. But once we're maintaining that capacity and just maintaining it, as simple as that, we have to have safety, we have to have all these things into place. The jobs per barrel of oil of production are, they're much less. And when you're not increasing your capacity, you're not creating jobs. And that's a big problem for Alberta right now. So I think it's a little different everywhere, but.
Yeah. Well, again, I've mentioned that being in Alberta, it's the heart of, in many ways, the oil industry in Canada. It's an entire, there's an entire ecosystem, a tradition. I remember my buddy Jarrett, when he began in the renewables journey, I learned that there's an entire career path for oil and gas, in particular natural gas, siting and development. There's an entire career track in the university, which frankly we just don't have in the university for the most part. We have renewables certificates, but it's a real career track. It's all, it's no different than a real estate career track. How and where did you see deficiencies that the renewable energy doesn't offer for oil and gas that you've had to overcome in terms of your understanding how to turn the corner and become, as we call it, a renewable energy professional?
Well, I think it really depends on what your background is. When you speak to specific programs, especially in places like Alberta, like the colleges, universities, they are very much tailored to building up these industries, building up the skill sets, as you say. My background's electrical as well as project management. There's a lot of skill sets, electrical, project management, safety, engineering, electrical especially, that are very transferable. They don't require a great deal of kind of re-education. So it is one of those things where, especially myself, when we're planning large scale projects in the future, I love the idea of hiring oil and gas workers, especially. For the simple fact of we're trying to, what we see is change the world. We see a big impact we can make. And the only way you can really do something like that, from my perspective, is to bring people along. I think the fear of job loss, the fear of people's families being affected is a real negative on the conversation. I think the more people we can include is for the best. And kind of as what you're speaking to there, like, I think it would be a huge boon to see some of the larger solar companies, wind companies, working with institutions to develop programs for more of that career path on more of a specific nature, engineering, design, stuff like that, because it can make a big difference.
Yeah, indeed. A few years ago, U.S. labor leader and environmental visionary Tony Mazzocchi pioneered thinking what we now kind of term a just transition, and this is folks that are moving out of the fossil fuel industry into new opportunities, including, throughout, I'm here on the East Coast of the United States, throughout coal country, there is a big movement to sort of re-educate, help those workers in that industry move into new roles. Amanda, you spend a lot of time with folks who are looking for that next step in their career. For you, what have been some of the challenges that have been expressed for folks in the fossil fuel industry who are actively looking for a role in renewables?
Yeah, it's a really good question, Nico, and it's something that's extremely relevant right now. I've never seen so many job seekers in oil, gas, and energy looking to shift. This is pretty unprecedented. So, I chat with 3 clients per day, Monday through Friday, and I'd say about 75% of them are asking me to write 2 resumes. They need options. So, again, kind of Brian mentioned that it depends on the role that they occupy, but a lot of people that I work with a lot of geologists, geophysicists, geoscientists, reservoir engineers, operations managers, people in technical sales. So it kind of runs the gamut. But I also work with process engineers and people who do facilities management. And I think that downstream people are getting a little freaked out, thinking through how they could transition to renewables. Operations managers, there's a lot of opportunities. Technical sales, a lot of opportunities to transition because the transferable skills are there. Right. So you have this kind of not seamless, but you have okay, I can negotiate contracts. I can, do large scale capital projects. I can do AFEs. All of these things will transition to something in the renewables industry, but it's my more specific niche oil and gas people, especially a lot of geos that are really concerned, but they want to do things like data analysis, right? And that can be something, machine learning, AI, those things can be transferable. So it's trying to figure out what the skills are that they have, look at a copious amount of job descriptions, and then see what aligns, right? Kind of finding a synthesis between those two, and then determining what they actually want to do, right? Not just spraying and praying their resume out to every single renewables job that they find, but seeing, okay, where is their core strength? What do they enjoy doing? And what would they enjoy doing in the renewables industry?
I see a lot of folks as well who reach out, they hear the Suncast show and they'll say, hey, what are the pathways of entry into renewables? Brian pointed out that a lot of the folks who have those hard skills in the field doing prospecting are going to find it relatively easy and similar. The work, in fact, of prospecting for solar, which is in many ways just it's land development is a lot different than the geological requirements, the science of finding oil pockets or gas pockets, right? One of the things that I've heard is that in many ways, oil and gas employees are overqualified for the renewables industry. Yet time and time again, we see that hiring managers put qualifiers that say must have, let's say, 5 years of renewables experience.
Exactly.
How does the renewable energy industry itself, in particular solar and energy storage, get in its own way instead of attracting folks from oil and gas that are in many ways overqualified? How are we getting in our own way, and how can we start to remove those barriers?
Yeah, well, I think that there's a kind of a prevailing idea that renewables employers will, not to put too harsh a term on it, but discriminate when it comes to hiring oil and gas pros, because there is a general idea that whenever the oil and gas, energy industry pops back up, that those pros will then go back over there for the salary or for, going back to what they know, sometimes what they love. So I think that there needs to be a push and a play of between the two industries and with the job seekers in the middle, for the job seekers to realize, okay, if you're switching industries, just because oil and gas and renewables have a lot of similarities, or it seems like a parallel shift, it's a shift still, right? So you still have to have the sales pitch lined up. You still have to explain why you're wanting to shift. And I always tell a lot of my clients and my prospective clients that, hey, it may say 5 years on there. It's going to say that in any industry you apply for, right? It's going to tell you if, for sales, must have 5 years sales experience. That doesn't mean you shouldn't apply. If you have 70-75% match with your skills, tailor, reach out, network, and apply. So.
I think when you're even just talking about kind of the geo side of it, I think that's a really interesting angle. Some of the people I know in the States, especially that are in that pocket, I think this decade we're going to see a big boom in energy storage, which all the minerals that are going to be required for that, and you're starting to see governments acknowledge what we need to get caught up on with all the rare earth minerals. I'm starting to talk to some different people, especially in the States, that are starting to say, like, this is something that's coming. It's not there. It's not a direct transition yet. But I think it is something that we will see a boom this decade. I personally think energy storage is going to be a bigger impact this decade than even clean energy production. Because
midstream players already do this, right? So there just aren't as many, right? So I mean, you have all these salt caverns, available prospecting for the caverns where you're actually drilling for storage. So there's a distinction in the different sectors in terms of what the alignment is to shift over to renewables and where that ideal fit is based off the sector that you've been in.
Yeah, I think it's actually a really good point, Brian, that you bring up, that we can sometimes, especially in the US market or North American market, be a little ethnocentric around thinking about what's happening in the States, what's happening in Mexico or Canada. But the reality is that most of the mining for the natural resources, not just for storage, but also for solar panels, for the electronics, the copper that goes into all of our inverters, is happening in developing countries like Chile. Bolivia has the largest lithium salt capacity in, at least in our hemisphere, potentially in the world. Right. Let's speak a bit, Brian, to where the opportunities actually exist beyond. We tend to also talk about solar because solar is the fastest growing sector. Energy storage, I believe you are right that over the next decade is going to be the equalizing factor. It is going to vastly outpace solar and wind and all other renewables in terms of our ability to transition away from base load based on fossil fuels towards renewables with backup and stored power. How do you differentiate, Brian, the different sectors that make up this, what we call the new energy economy?
Well, it's a complicated question, I guess. I think so many people in renewables can fit into different sectors as far as being a developer or being maybe an electrician or even just project management, stuff like that. I think you do need to have your expertise. And I think that's something kind of Amanda is really speaking to as far as transferring over. But I think it even exists in renewables between solar and wind and battery storage and stuff like that. I do see lots of ads out there because there is kind of a growing awareness and hype on renewable development in Alberta in particular, and the government's getting very involved to try, the federal government, I should say, not the provincial, to try and push that along. And you just see those ads out there that are very specific as to, like we talked about with experience for solar with storage, stuff like that for project management. And it's a little bit comical almost when you speak to like 5 years experience in solar, stuff like that. Like there is so few battery scaled projects in Alberta. So, I mean, if they're really getting people that are fulfilling these obligations, they're either from outside or they're selling themselves. And I don't think there's any problem with that. Realistically, it's the engineering that fills that gap. It's not the project management from my perspective. So I do think it's much like Amanda's saying, transferring between, it's complicated. There's possibilities. There's some that transfer very easily. There's some that are much more complicated. And I think that's one of those things where I think government involvement is very important to try and give some of these workers kind of an easier path with education to transfer over. It really depends on government policies, where they want this to go more than anything. And that's one of those things where when we talk about bringing in oil and gas workers into the fold, I think it's really important if we want to move this in this direction, we have to include people. And I think people's opinions are a big driver on what the political opinions will be, right? The politicians tend to go where the numbers tell them.
Yep.
So if we can push it in that direction and share and try and include everybody, I think it's a really positive step, but not an easy one, of course.
Yeah, and overall in terms of diversity of the energy mix, I mean, we talk a lot in the energy sector about energy mix, and solar, generally renewables, wind and solar leading the charge there are the bulk of the majority of new generation capacity. What a lot of folks who have traditionally spent their career in fossil fuels don't realize is the different sectors that serve renewables. You know, if you think about the smile curve that we all learn in, if those who maybe went through an MBA program, but it goes from raw materials extraction, and this is sort of where the profitability is, all the way down to assembly, right? But raw materials extraction, which we talked about, brings all the elements into a factory. Manufacturing, by and large, has been dominated in the last 10 years in Southeast Asia. China, a big player and contributor to that, obviously Korea and the Philippines. There are lots of different areas of manufacturing. Storage still, by and large, still being manufactured in Southeast Asia. I think that most folks don't really, they have a hard time wrapping their heads around, well, I'm a chemical scientist at at a plastics company that depends on, by and large, the oil industry, what opportunities are there for me, right? So we've got storage, which is basically chemistry. We've got solar panels, which is electrical engineering, and both of those have huge manufacturing sectors, both in the United States and North America, as well as in Europe and Asia. But even, and certainly material scientists, if you think about the number of sort of different job duties. So physicists, chemists, material scientists, there are a lot of different sort of credentials that can transition. I think one of the broader questions that folks like Jigger Shaw and other sort of the CLI folks are asking is, how do we get the data scientists, the folks that would otherwise be optimizing algorithms to improve Facebook advertising, how do we get that generation of computer scientists into the renewable energy business as well? And I know that the oil and gas industry has, for the last 5+ years, adopted at a much faster pace things like blockchain and data science. Yeah. Where do you see that sort of group of folks? Are we going to see those folks also being a part of these layoffs that we can pull in? Or are we building a different narrative for, say, the Googlers and Facebook folks to come in?
I think so. I think there's definitely that possibility. You're seeing more and more of these companies. There's actually a panel on this event on Friday with some blockchain folks that are, I should say, smart grid and blockchain, but with some companies, some new ideas where they're kind of, turning kilowatt hours into Bitcoin and that sort of concept to generate that sort of aspect. I think it's very early on for our industry. I think it can become a bigger thing, especially if there is enough value put on carbon. All that stuff gets a lot easier because you can sell carbon credits, all that sort of thing. It works the residential market, like we're seeing with some of these companies, but it is early stage. And like most of these things, I think the oil and gas sector, because they do have these giant conglomerates that have been at this for a very, very long time. They know what they're doing, and they have the data scientists, I would guess, very much further ahead than renewables.
Amanda, I know you and I've talked about this as well. There does seem to be a bit of a discrepancy, and certainly the renewables industry, for growing 15, 17 times faster than the overall job market, has a large capacity for hiring, but there seems to be a discrepancy at the professional level that folks are worried about. Will they be able to preserve the income that they've been making in, I'll call it, the oil-rich economy? How are you navigating that discussion with your clients?
Yeah, so we have that discussion a lot, and I always remind them that I'm not a recruiter, or you don't really do like salary negotiation stuff or stuff like that. But based off of the kind of the experience that I have working with clients who have transitioned and things like that, or people just kind of going online looking at a standard rate, or kind of leveling in terms of the distinction between someone in oil and gas who would get what type of salary in renewables, most of them will see kind of a distinction, and realizing that they're going to have to start entry level is usually kind of the start of the discussion, in terms of them saying, okay, will I have to start out? I have 20+ years in oil gas, the oil and gas industry doing operations management. Will I have to start entry level in renewables? And I tell them, well, I don't think that you should shoot for entry level, right? Don't shoot for entry level, because you obviously are qualified. You just have to use your transferable skills to highlight how you're the perfect fit for that role. The distinction is just figuring out, I think there's a lot of misinformation, and there is a lack of information about the renewables industry at this time, I think, in the oil and gas sector, and at large. And that's what I hear a lot from my clients is, the salary questions usually stem from, but what options are there for me? And then they go hunting on Indeed or on LinkedIn to find jobs before actually doing research in the renewables industry to actually figure out what would be the right fit for them. So I think that, you guys were highlighting at the beginning that, a lot of these details or, courses aren't really offered as much, as readily as maybe they should be. And I've seen things, energy management certificates and things like that. But some people even have renewable industry certificates that I've worked with. but a lot of people will tend to see that as being very niche, very specific, and they won't want to pursue that. Instead, they'll go for the MBA or for the broader energy management degrees. So yeah, I think that it's tricky, and a lot of it's based off of misinformation right now, or a lack of information when it comes to salary and things like that.
I say on Suncast a lot, something that a past guest from Kindle Energy Investment expressed to me that really opened my eyes to the thinking around career change. It's been 14 years since I did a career change from the music industry to the renewables industry, so I didn't really think about specifically the transferable skills at the time. And I find that a lot of folks, I bet you see this too, Amanda, that when I get clients coming to me asking to help identify those transferable skills, they're trying to change multiple variables in the equation. The advice that I give them is what John Shamanis gave me, which is you never want to change more than one aspect of your career. So if you are working in accounting in oil and gas, go find an accounting job in renewables.
Yeah.
Don't switch to operations or some other, just because those are the roles that you find in Indeed or other job boards. So, you know, but I often also challenge the idea that you have to start at that entry level. I think that it's a common refrain that we have to be willing to take a step back, one step back to take two steps forward. Brian, have you experience with helping with both yourself and helping others find a transition into the renewables industry where they aren't, in fact, taking a step back because they're really focused? I'm a land guy, so I'm going to go develop land. I'm a banker, so I'm going to go find money.
I think my experience so far has been very transferable skill sets, whether it be electrical, whether it be engineering, whether it be project development, business development, stuff like that. It's very easily transferable. I think even when we talk, just kind of taking a step back, when we talk about kind of the wages and the difference there, I think that one thing from my experience being in oil and gas and people I've kind of transferred with have experienced is one of the biggest reasons that you tend to see that difference in wage is just hours. Hours worked. I know when I worked in oil and gas, it was always long hours. We always worked 50, 60-hour weeks. Anytime somebody was, I shouldn't say anytime, but a lot of the jobs are camp jobs. So you're going out of town, you're away from your family for a week at a time, sometimes 2 weeks at a time. And there is a large incentive based on that. And I completely understand people sometimes, you know, they've built their life around that income. It's difficult to get past for a lot of people. And I completely understand it. I'm sympathetic, but it is one of those things where like here in Alberta, we've been on an oil jobs decline since probably 2013. So it's at some point it's not worth, how would I put it? It's not worth keep fighting that. It's not worth to keep fighting that. You are definitely better off, I think, having a solid job that makes a little bit less money and has a brighter future. There's no saying that with enough growth there couldn't be similar wages or stuff like that are directly transferable. But I just think because of the way oil has been, and again in our province, you're seeing those wages drop very, very steadily as they try and find ways to make these projects make money. And when they have, you know, tens of thousands of people that are willing to take them. So you are going to see, in my opinion, you're going to see those wages continue to drop. We see it even in my background being electrical contracting as well. We see it in that industry because for years and years, there were so many people doing electrical work in Alberta that a large portion of the electrical talent pool are journeymen. They're very experienced. They've been doing this for 10 plus years. And now when we go to hire somebody and we're looking for apprentices, because you kind of want to balance your labor pool for skill set and cost, 90% of the resumes you're going to get are going to be journeyman electrician, despite the fact you're kind of specifically asking for apprentices, because that's where the talent pool is. And it's a little bit of that kind of overqualification thing too.
Yes. Overqualification. Yes, because that's what I'll tell my clients. I'll say, you're going to waste your time applying for entry-level positions, honestly, because they're going to see it was overqualified and not the right fit. So don't waste your time. Just instead of applying to 100, curate 10 to 15 really solid prospects or leads, and then tailor. And like you said, Nico, don't go too far off your niche, right? I mean, like if you're in finance, do finance. If you're, and do your research. Do your research in that new industry and figure out where you'd fit.
Well, one of the areas that folks are even aware of the clean energy revolution, this event that we are experiencing thanks to Brian, is the best potential job source I've found, and that is LinkedIn.
Yep.
Brian, I know that you have had some recently massive success. I mean, seriously, my hat's off to anyone who can get 100,000 plus views and shares and reactions. Where do you see folks taking missteps on LinkedIn, and how can we help them correct their job search and their networking on this massive tool?
Well, I think it's easy to say, but I think you need to get off the sidelines. You need to speak your mind.
Yeah.
Of course, be careful not to offend. And I'm sure even comments I've made, people have disagreed with. I definitely try to walk that line, I'll say. But I think you need to exercise your opinion, and you need to be out there learning from different people and not being afraid to say, hey, there's Nico. I follow his show. Let's try and connect with him and let's meet him. LinkedIn can really make the world a lot smaller, and it can create opportunities that are mind blowing to me. I've really only been pushing on LinkedIn this year. It's been kind of a new thing with the pandemic, right? We all spent a lot more time at home, and we're looking to develop our businesses and our careers and all that. And I think everybody's got a lot to say and a lot to offer. And if you put that out there, there's going to be some people that want to engage in those conversations with you. I don't think making statements of this is the way it is, but putting opinions out there, inviting people to comment. We can all learn from each other. I can tell you I've learned every day on LinkedIn. I generally see something that amazes me. I learn from, and it's great. You meet some great people. You really do. It's been eye-opening for me. It's been great.
Yeah, LinkedIn is a huge tool. Huge. I mean, and you're right, getting off the sidelines. I mean, I think that it's tricky because how the LinkedIn algorithm works is that the more that you engage in meaningful ways, the more your analytics go up, right? So people will see things on your wall. If you post, you share, you like, people see it on other people's walls. So you start showing up on other people's feeds, which means you get more connection opportunities. And LinkedIn is huge. It's huge right now. Have to get on it.
Not only do you have to get on it, but as Brian said, you got to get off the signs and get active. What I find is a lot of folks they'll only use LinkedIn when it's kind of like prayer. You only use it in a moment of crisis, right? And I would urge you, if you're watching this and you are on the sidelines, that you gotta use this as a tool the same way you do anything else. I have friends who leverage and use Twitter because Twitter is their news feed. They're on Twitter an hour a day. Brian, you and I have talked about this. Probably the most actionable advice that we can give you is set a calendar, set a time on your day, every day at, let's say, 7 or 10 in the morning, and spend 30 minutes. Start with 15 minutes. Get in the habit of regularly checking in. It is a social network. It's a network for a reason. I know Brian and I have to imagine, Amanda, you as well, as prolific as I've seen you on LinkedIn, we get business from LinkedIn because we do what Amanda said, which is Brian posts, I jump in and I like that post because I want to see Brian succeed, but I also want to be able to find all the people who are commenting on Brian's posts. Right. You're right, Amanda, that the algorithm, it would seem, is going to favor not those who are posting 5 times a day, but those who post once a day, but go and engage and drop comments on the people's feeds. Here's a little trick or tip for folks, like where you might see someone like Brian get 50 or 100 comments. Most people get 0.
Yes.
If you're the one person who comments on that person's post, you could potentially not only make their day, but you open that door to a relationship. Yep. And this is what I call in our Dream Job case study program. This is the side door networking tip that I give most people is if you identify a company or a niche or a thought leader that you want access to, there is no other platform like LinkedIn for 2 reasons. One, you could be one of the handful of folks that regularly show up in their feed. 2, you can use tools like Sales Navigator or even better, InMail, which you can pay for or you can get included as a premium member to really do direct outreach with someone you don't have any of their contact information. So we don't have to belabor the topic of how to maximize LinkedIn, but if you do one thing differently tomorrow, then I would say put on your calendar 15 minutes, 30 minutes. If you do two things differently, follow Brian and Amanda and engage with the people that are engaging, not just with Brian and Amanda, but with the people that are engaging in their network. That's the secret sauce of LinkedIn. Brian, what opportunity do you see for oil and gas folks who are trying to enter through the side door? You know this segment a whole lot better than I do. Is it more land developers, more chemists, more office jobs? What sort of areas would you encourage as high opportunity for growth for them to be? The preponderance of evidence would suggest that they're going to find more job opportunities in that area or that sector.
Sure. I think what you mentioned as far as business development, land development, electrical engineering, and electrical specifically are so very transferable. If you're an electrician, you don't think you can switch to renewables or something, you just are not paying attention. It's such a very transferable skill. I would even say different things. Like if you, it doesn't matter if you work on a rig, something like that. Some of those skills it's experience, but it wasn't a bunch of education, right? I know a lot of people that work in the oil sands, and a lot of it was you put in years, you showed what you could do. But a lot of that, people really need to appreciate that some of those great jobs that are more laborious, they have their job title isn't going to be laborer,
Mm-hmm.
but it's really, the skill set was based on being somebody who can work hard, right? It's somebody who's willing to learn, willing to show up on site, willing to go out of town from their family and work hard and really commit to a job. These are valuable skills, and in the renewable industry, we need to see that. And people in the oil and gas industry need to realize that as these opportunities arise, and it's not that they're waiting for you in every city and every place, but they are growing, and they are growing. We shouldn't be afraid to transfer. Some of them are more transferable than they visually appear. I know, Amanda, you're in Texas, and Texas next year is set to boom for renewables. The planned projects for solar, wind, energy storage are absolutely insane. I know in Alberta, our federal government's planning a lot of development, a lot of encouraged financing, stuff like that. There's going to be jobs available.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think people should be afraid to reach out. If you've worked in oil and gas your whole life and you want to reach out to somebody in the solar industry, what can I do? How can I transfer? Where do I fit? If you've been off for a little while and maybe you're not doing something that you want to be doing, it's worth a try. It's worth a discussion. It's worth looking at. I would definitely say.
Absolutely.
Ask for help as well, right? Amanda and I both do coaching for folks that are trying to go through this process, and it's something that identifying those transferable skills can often be a daunting task. I mean, we have a whole 10-page worksheet that we give our clients to actually walk through that. I know, Amanda, you go through an exhaustive process of looking back at the work that they've done. I want to highlight something that Brian said, because Amanda, you're in Texas. The majority of the oil and gas sector from a jobs perspective is in Texas. Some 40,000 people have lost their jobs in Texas. Yeah. So let's talk for a second to the Texas folks. Where are you seeing the pockets of opportunity, and in particular for those who are maybe not in Texas? What is that, given that it's a lot of headquarters, what are the skill types that represent the oil and gas industry in your home state, that those maybe in the renewables industry that are watching this as hiring managers would say, oh, I didn't realize I could find that kind of person in the oil and gas sector? Maybe they don't need solar experience. Could you highlight some of those roles?
Sure. I mean, and Brian might be able to speak to this as well. I mean, so, I'm in Houston. I actually live in the energy corridor. So yeah, I mean, we have, if you go over to La Porte, you're going to see all the refineries. You got downstream, you got midstream, you got upstream, all over the place. So yeah, I mean, I think that the clients that I work with who have had the most success transitioning have really been in operations. This has been key because they have such a wide range, right? They can do cost controls, they can do facilities management. They are working with large crews. They can, especially if they have a background in, like what you said, Brian, electrical engineering, to top it off, they have a leg up because they have such a wide range working in the field. At the same time, that can also be challenging if they have a lot of years of experience doing that, and they're used to being that drilling engineer everybody goes to. They're used to having a job. They're used to not having to have a resume to get a job. It's really daunting and really challenging. And especially here in Houston, where the work has always been plentiful, it's really tough for a lot of them realizing that they may need to relocate and not knowing where to relocate. And I'm sure that's very unique for you too, Brian, being in, you're in Calgary, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So yeah, being in Canada, the clients I've worked with in Canada are in a unique spot too. You know, a lot of well site consultants trying to figure out, okay, I've always just had work. What's happening here? What's, you know, and usually well site consultants don't even need a resume. They just know people.
It's true.
Right.
So
yeah, it's there's definitely going to be those jobs that are not directly transferable, not easy. Maybe even renewables aren't the best path for them. Everybody's got to find different paths. Even when we talked about energy management, there's so much actual work in energy efficiency, and we're seeing more and more government investment in that as well. Again, that does tend to line up more with electrical engineering and consulting and whatnot like that. But a lot of those education bases don't require an electrical background or anything like that, but there are those education programs you can take for that. And it's staggering how many jobs are really in energy efficiency. People don't really, they typically talk renewables or oil and gas, where energy efficiency is a pillar right there with it.
mm.
Well, I think that one of the things that folks maybe aren't as aware of, even within these mega corporations like BP, Chevron, Shell, who are all laying off employees left and right, is that while it's not in Houston, those organizations in San Francisco, in New York, in London, in Madrid are investing massively in renewables.
Yep.
Lightsource BP has a major investment from BP, as the name would suggest. Their team, I know for sure, in Madrid grew from 5 to 42 in the last year. Mm-hmm. Emily and the team at Lightsource BP here in the US have grown to a larger team, much more than 50, and they're hiring daily. I think it's really interesting. I'll talk to folks in the oil and gas industry. I had a client from Shell who's a safety manager, and which is an entire certification process itself. It's probably one of the most structured project management roles you could possibly have, and a lot on the line for someone with that kind of credential. There's not a solar park in the United States or in the world that would need the level of like quality control that a safety manager for a well site would need. So I would encourage folks to think internally in the company. If you are really comfortable at Shell or BP or Chevron, think about the names I just mentioned. Shell, Chevron, and BP are for sure investing some of the heaviest into green energy, right? Even we talk about hydrogen and other areas. I'd like to ask Brian and Amanda, as we wrap here, one of the things that I find is the most helpful for folks is exactly what Brian said earlier. You got to research, but it's very daunting. The internet is daunting in that regard. You just search solar power. Let's leave folks with a handful of resources that they could follow up. And beyond following you and Amanda on LinkedIn, where else can they copy your habits so that they can get smart on how the renewable energy industry is growing and they can fit into it?
That's a very good one. Good question. I would say like LinkedIn is a gold mine for renewable information. I can tell you, I'm just constantly learning from other professionals. I would follow people and find out who they're following, find out who they're liking. People like yourself, Nico, like Jigger Shaw, like Julie Piper, all these people. Merrick Kubik is a genius as far as I'm concerned when it comes to energy storage.
Sure is.
There's so much information out there, and they'll make a point about something and maybe reference a study or something like that. Like you can go down that well, so to speak, and just learn all day long. As well as when we talk about just jobs and education, look at your local colleges. Look for different programs that suit you. I know in Alberta, the Northern Alberta Institute of Technology, NATE, they have an alternative energy program, which is really, really exceptional. And it's producing a lot of employed people. That's one I would definitely look at. But yeah, just get out there. LinkedIn is a gold mine. It's a gold mine for building contacts, but it's also a gold mine for information. And I wouldn't be afraid to get out there and speak your mind and ask questions.
Yeah.
Yeah, and taking off that, there should be a trifecta of things that you do. So there should be reading, right? Like looking up Forbes articles on the renewable sector or on the connections between oil and gas, the oil and gas industry and renewables, podcasts, right? So you read, you listen, you reach out. Okay, so you're reading, you have your little collection of different ones that you read that have kind of a broader base of knowledge, and then podcasts are great, or even following you, of course, Brian, or you, Nico, like popping in on YouTube channels, that'd be kind of reading or listening, and then reaching out, right? Because you can have all this knowledge stored up, but if you're not learning from people who are in the field, who actually know what those jobs entail, and you're not making the connections before you have to find a job actively, then it's just missing out on such a huge opportunity to make sure that you're successful in your job search, rather than trying to reach out the moment that you're laid off or you're let go from a position. Having those connections already built, having the knowledge base already there, is the most vital thing, I think, to making sure that the transition is smooth, because that's the thing that I see is the most challenging for people that I chat with, or clients I work with, is just not even just getting taken completely off guard. They have no knowledge base. There's just a complete black hole of wondering, what do I do now? So
100%.
Yeah, kind of using those three, that's helpful.
I love that. That's really great advice. And I 100% concur on dig the well before you need the water.
Yep.
And one other area for those who perhaps are relatively unfamiliar with the media scene in renewables, green tech media, which is now Wood Mackenzie, has forever been a really sort of stalwart in research and in surfacing good content. The folks at Vox do an amazing job of bridging the divide of the socio-political aspect. So I think Mr. Vox is the guy I follow on Twitter. I can't remember exactly his name, but just you can create lists on Twitter of just phenomenal folks to follow as well, just to not be so LinkedIn centric. PV Magazine USA has some of the best journalism I've seen in the industry. Solar Wake Up, a friend Jan Brandt has had this newsletter daily, every day. If you just want like the quickest digest because you don't know where to look, Solar Wake Up is a great entry point to see where the interesting articles are happening or being curated globally. And there's another in Canada, actually, PV Buzz, that also has a really loyal following of electrical engineers, and specifically the Canadian market follows PV Buzz really well, and they curate great content as well. I appreciate the nod to podcasts. There are a lot of podcasts. A lot of folks are familiar with Jigger's podcast, The Energy Gang, my podcast, Suncast. But if there's one that I would recommend for those who really want to understand just from the beginning, how is this energy transition happening? It's one called Freeing Energy. If you just look up the Freeing Energy podcast, I'll give a little nod there to a buddy of mine that runs that podcast that for me is a masterclass on the energy transition that we're experiencing. Another one would be just a quick little dopamine hit for you that you won't be able to stop listening to, is called Drilled, which came out, I think, 2 years ago. That was the best audio expose of how the oil and gas industry has avoided the topic of climate change despite their own scientists telling them that it was real. So I agree with all of those things that you guys have said in terms of how to inform yourself, and then reaching out is essential. I think that we have covered the gamut on ways to empower folks. I'm going to kick it back to you, Brian, to wrap up, and thank you for hosting such an amazing conversation. I look forward to the rest of the sessions in the Clean Energy Revolution Conference.
I appreciate that, and I appreciate you leading this discussion, Nico. It was a great experience for me, and I appreciate your involvement as well, Amanda. I think it's just kind of the tip of the spear. There's so much people can learn. Just keep getting out there, following LinkedIn, podcasts, just like everybody is saying. Everybody has said here. I just want to thank everybody who tuned in, and I think our next event is up in a little over an hour. So please tune in. We're going to be getting into some vehicle to grid stuff, as well as some EV fleet stuff. So lots more information today, and as well tomorrow and Friday. So thank everybody, and have a great day.
Awesome.
And subscribe to Brian's YouTube channel.
That's right.
Subscribe, like, smash the like button, as the YouTubers like to say.
Thank you, Nico.
Yeah, you bet.
Have a great day, guys.
Thank you too.